Hi everyone, my name is SAKSHI Sharma and today I have decided to make a video on United Nations because some of the students, especially my sister, have requested me to make a video on that topic because some of the people finding it very difficult. So I have decided to make a comprehensive video on its structure, its formation and its functioning as well. Let's have a brief about it. United Nations, first of all, I would like to inform all of you that United Nations is an international and intergovernmental organization. What we mean by intergovernment organization is that various governments of various countries around the world, around 193 countries, they have decided to cooperate on certain issues. And when there is a cooperation among governments of the countries, the organization itself is called intergovernmental organization. It is a post Second World War organization, which means after Second World War, when they recognized a need for a comprehensive and a robust organization to prevent war and to focus some of the points, it was decided that we should have a nation, a united structure, and that was known as United Nations. It is a mutually agreed organization, which means that all of the countries of the world, most countries, because few countries are not member of it, most countries have decided to be part of this organization and to actually agree some of the issues, some of the principles that must govern the whole world. For example, some of the democratic principles that the government and the people should be ruled by the people whom they choose. So there are certain principles that all countries agree that they should be implemented worldwide. Why international organization? It was one of the question that was asked us, and it was one of the headline in the your NCRT book, that why we need united an international organization, because there are some of the things and there are some of the issues that cannot be dealt by one country, by one government. For example, disease control, maritime security, counter-terrorism activities, and some of the things like food distribution, because some of the countries are suffering from civil wars, some of the countries are suffering from floods, tsunami, and lots of natural calamities and insurgency. For example, Afghanistan, there is a Taliban issue in Afghanistan, and lots of people are suffering because of it. There is a drought, and people are not getting water, people are not getting food, and there is a huge cultivation of opium in Afghanistan, and that's why people are suffering a lot. In that scenario, there is no one in the world who can help Afghanistan. So we recognized a need that there should be an international organization which could help a particular country when it is suffering from a particular kind of disease. For example, we have seen lots of organizations who are working in India itself. We have seen United Nations Organization for Women's Rights, because I have in contact with it, and there are lots of organizations who are working in India. And recently there was an issue about United Nations Human Rights Commission, Sri Lanka issue, and United Nations Human Rights Commission. So there are lots of things that need to be recognized, and there is a time for these recognition, and that's why there is a need for an international organization. It helps us with the matter of war and peace. When there is a possibility of war between two countries, an international organization interrupt and help two countries or more than two countries in resolving the dispute peacefully instead of going to a full-fledged war. For example, in 1953, there was a war between North Korea and South Korea. So there was a huge help that was provided by India and by United Nations to the war, and there is still a war zone between two countries, but still there is a peace. So there comes the role of an international organization, cooperation and better living standard for humanity across the world. See, when there is a violation of human rights in any country, for example, in India, in Sri Lanka, in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Bangladesh, in any country, when there is an issue of human right abuse, For example, some of the organizations have reported that there is a huge human rights violation in Kashmir in India, and obviously because of civil war, there is a huge human right abusing issue in Sri Lanka. So these issues are not raised by a country. For example, India could not go against Sri Lanka because we have to maintain our strategic relationship with Sri Lanka. So we have to maintain a friendly relations with Sri Lanka. So we cannot go against Sri Lanka on an international platform. But such things like human right abuse, these are raised by international organization itself. And United Nations Human Rights Commission has given a report and has filed a case against Sri Lanka over human rights abuse. So in that case, this creates a pressure on the government to do something for human rights, and human rights are very important in this scenario when people and when government has so much powers, because government, because of technology, finance, military, recently we have seen in Myanmar there is, because of military power, the army has recently taken a coup. So we have seen there are lots of matters and there is a lots of need for human rights realization. International organizations provide a platform for discussion to countries which have conflicts and antagonisms. It avoids any possibility of war and maintain peace, and it also fight against social evils. For example, we have freedom of expression, freedom of speech, and religious intolerance in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh, where there are Islamic states, where there is a huge problems of human rights. They tend to recognize these rights and raise a voice against all these human rights abuse, to provide for rules, mechanisms and bureaucracy. Uh, we have seen that a territorial border of a country limits to the land, but at the sea there are rules that are made by United Nations. So we need an organization that makes rules for certain things which have common, which are common property. For example, air. We cannot own sky. We cannot own water. For example, seas, Indian Ocean. We have the name Indian Ocean, but India do not own Indian Ocean. All the countries of the world have a right to navigate through it. So there is a need that some of the rules should be maintained there. So who makes rules? United Nations and international organization make rules in this scenario. International organizations maintain trust and they maintain faith in cooperation, that there should be cooperation and there is a need for cooperation to prevent hegemony and promote multilateralism. What is multilateralism? Multilateralism is a concept where various countries have their own role to perform in international platform. For example, after Cold War, after the disintegration of USSR in 1991, there was a unipolar world of United States. United States with their financial, military, space and lots of powers, it has gained a hegemony and all the countries need to dictate to the terms of the US because of its power. So in that case, a country cannot take decisions on its own. They have to maintain and they have to think about the United States. In this scenario, there is a need that all the countries should have their own independence. All the countries should be able and should be given the chance to make their decision for their own country on their own. So this is called multilateralism. Let's move to the next slide. Now there were some problems that were mentioned in the book, that why there is a problem with the United Nations and there are some other problems with the international organization. Because everything has its own merits and demerits. There is nothing like a free lunch. So we have to take everything with a pinch of salt. So there are problems with the international organizations, like there is a recognition that there should be need, but countries, some of the countries which are very intolerant and they are very resistant, they do not do anything for this. So there are various disagreement among countries on the some of the topics, like who will share the cost. For example, United Nations pay the huge budget to the United Nations while India pay a very less budget. So in that scenario, while United Nations is working for all of the country in an equal manner, so there must be a case for the United States to raise that we are giving a huge bunch of money to United Nations and it should work for the better conditions of United States. In that scenario, there are some of the conditions, there are some of the disagreement among countries. International Monetary Fund. There was a mention of International Monetary Fund. So there is a brief introduction of International Monetary Fund. It was formed in December 1945 after Bretton Woods Conference. It has headquartered at Washington DC, and it has managing director Kristalina Georgieva, and she is, I think, from which country? I don't remember. Chief economist is Geeta Gopinath, and she is from India, of course. And there are 190 members. Recently, one member is added to it. Now let's discuss about evolution of League of Nations. After First World War, there was the same need that was recognized for an international organization, that there should be international organization as well to avoid war. But unfortunately, we have seen Second World War, we have seen annexation of China by Japan, we have seen annexation of various parts by colonial powers after First World War. So eventually, League of Nations failed in its objective. So it was formed in 1920 after Paris Peace Conference, and it failed in preventing occurrence of war in Second World War especially. So United Nations is a successor of League of Nations, which means that United Nations is formed after League of Nations with the hope that it will perform, it will fulfill the objectives that were not fulfilled by League of Nations. United Nations. There is a brief introduction of United Nations, when it is formed, and how many members are there in the United Nations. So it was formed on 24th of October 1945 by 51 members, and India was also a member member of it at the time of its formation. There are 193 members, and there are 2 observer members, and 2 observer members are Holy See, that is in Vatican City, and State of Palestine. Official languages are Arabic, French, Chinese, Spanish, English, and Russian. And there is also actually a topic, and there were also actually in India there was a sense that Hindi should also be a language at United Nations, because around millions and billions of people around the world speak Hindi. So Secretary General Antonio Guterres, he is from Portugal, and it is his second term. He has completed his first term, it is his second term. And Deputy Secretary General is Amina J. Mohammed, and she is a woman. So proud of us, proud of her. Principal organs of United Nations. So there are 6 principal organs of United Nations. General Assembly, and there are 193 members in General Assembly, with each member with 1 vote. And all the decisions of United Nations are taken by voting, with majority of the members as a criteria. Security Council, there are 15 members in Security Council, and 5 members are permanent and 50 members are non-permanent. And India is also a non-permanent member of Security Council at that point of time. And especially in August month, India has a presidency of Security Council. Secretariat is a place where all the administrative and bureaucratic work of the United Nations took place. For example, documentation about its budget, all the things that are related to United Nations took place at Secretariat. Economic and Social Council. It is a council which work for some social goodness and eliminate some social evils. For example, ending poverty, ending hunger, working for gender equality, education, health sector, clean energy, sustainable development, communities, justice, promotes peace, all these things. Trusteeship Council, it is a council which was abolished in 1994 because it has completed its objective, and after the fulfillment of its objective it was abolished. International Court of Justice, there are 15 judges which are nominated for 9 years at International Court of Justice, and there have been at least 5 members from India who have served at International Court of Justice. And recently, the case of in India, there was a case of a Navy officer that was gone to International Court of Justice, which was fought by famous lawyer Harish Salve. So there is a brief and trivial information about it, and nothing to be worried about it. Some of the principles and objectives of United Nations. See, principles and objectives are same, especially, and we have seen that there are lots of problems around us: poverty, hunger, clean and sustainable energy, climate change, global warming, gender equality, and peace, sustainable development, cities, communities, infrastructure, economic development, and health structure, especially in the pandemic. There are lots of things that need to be done by United Nations, so it is doing so. For example, Food and Agriculture Organization and its member World Food Program has been given Nobel Prize in 2020 for its work in many countries of Africa where there is a huge shortage of food and people are suffering from food shortages. So because of its work, it was kudos at Nobel Prize with Nobel Prize. So what are the principles and objectives of United Nations? To prevent international conflict, of course, and to facilitate cooperation among states. To promote social economic development, because when there is a actually innovation, when there is a good infrastructure, there is a good education, health, of course, this is directly correlated to high economic growth. To promote multilateralism, to eliminate possibility of chemical, nuclear, and biological war. To uphold democratic principles. For example, there should be the rule of people who are chosen by the people, and there should be transparency, there should be independence, and there should not be any dictatorial rule. So there are some of the principles that need to be upheld by United Nations itself. There is a recognition of need. There is a recognition for some of the changes that need to be brought in the United Nations especially after Cold War. Because after Cold War, there were emergence of some of the new powers on the international platform, and one of the biggest example of it is India and China. Of course, they are $1 trillion economy, and they are playing a huge role on international platform. For example, recently India has sent dozens of vaccines to many countries of the world, and we are actually helping other countries in eliminating this pandemic. So actually we have a huge role to play at the international platform, and of course China has also a huge role to play at the international platform because it is a 15 trillion economy, that is 5 times more than us. So it is really wonderful. So after Cold War, when in Cold War there was a hegemony of two nations, as we know, USSR and USA, but after Cold War there was emergence of lots of powers: China, India, Brazil, Germany, France. There are lots of things and lots of countries that have come at the international platform to assume their own roles. So there was a recognition to have their own role in the United Nations Security Council as well. So there were two issues, and there were agreement that there should be reforms in the United Nations in the two ways. The first way is reform of the organizational structure and processes, and second type of reform is a review of the issues that fall within the jurisdiction of the organization, because jurisdiction of United Nations is very comprehensive and wide. We see that its role not only limits up to maintaining peace, security, and cooperation, but its role extends to ending poverty, hunger, gender equality, clean and sustainable energy, economic growth, infrastructure, sustainable energy, communities, cities, and promote justice, all these things. So it has huge jurisdiction. But there is also concern that no country and most of the country do not agree that what should be done and how it should be done and in which way and in what manner the reform should be brought. So there are concerns and there is no consensus among countries. Reforms of structure and processes. So there are some of the points that most of the country have agreed that there should be changes in these things. Function of the United Nations Security Council, demand for an increase in United Nations Security Council permanent and non-permanent membership, and India is also in the list of becoming an permanent member of United Nations Security Council. increase in the members from Asia, Africa, and South America, because we have seen that United Nations Security Council there are 5 permanent members, and 2 permanent members are from Asia itself, Russia and China, and two are from Europe, Britain and France. So there is no representation from Africa, from South America. So there is a concern that there should be representation from them as well. And other thing is that Western countries want budgetary procedure, because they pay huge amount and bunch of money to the United Nations, and they are in the realization that why we are paying so much. And some of the countries, some of the small and middle income countries, they are not paying that sum of money. So they want these sort of changes. There comes the issue of jurisdiction, as I have mentioned earlier, that most of the countries and some of the countries want that there should be greater jurisdiction that need to be given to United Nations. And there are countries, and mostly dictatorial and military power countries, and they want that there should be limitation to the jurisdiction of United Nations, and some of the things that need to be dealt by the government itself, and that there is no need of United Nations in some cases and some areas. So there are some of the reasons that people are in the demand of wanting a change in the structure of United Nations, because Soviet Union has collapsed, US has become strongest power in the unipolar world, a relationship between countries has changed, and China and India are fast emerging economies, economic Asia, because Asia is actually leading the world nowadays, and many countries have joined UN, United Nations General Assembly's membership has increased. And there are new set of challenges. For example, in 1947 and 1945, when United Nations was formed, there was nothing like terrorism. But now at present day, there is a huge concern for terrorism in Afghanistan, Iran, and Middle East countries, and in Pakistan and India. They are suffering from terrorism and all sort of activities. Some needed reforms that are also mentioned in your book, that there is an agreement among countries that the reform should be brought in these manner, and there is a criteria that what should be the membership for any country in United Nations Security Council. See that there is no clarity that what should be economy of the country to become the United Nations, to become a member of the United Nations Security Council. How actually there is no measurement to measure the military power of a country. So there we have some of the criteria, but we do not have the measurement, because every country has its own level, and every country is growing and developing at its own level. So we could not count that this country should be placed above this country, because some countries are performing very well in some sectors, while other countries are not performing very well in other sectors. For example, Australia, it has huge high standard of living. People are very happy. People have higher money in their pockets, and people are living very wonderful life. There is no environmental issues, very less environmental issues in Australia. But Australia is suffering from one problem, because it do not have good military power. India, France, China, Japan, they have good military prowess, but Australia on the other hand has a higher edge on human standards, human rights protection, environment, gender equality, but it has not performed good at military in military scenario. So while Australia could be a member of United Nations Security Council, but it doesn't have good military power. So there are lots of things that some countries have some edge in some sectors, while they do not have good performance in other sectors. So there are some of the concerns regarding this. Some concern there are over reforms and dubious ideas. Dubious means nebulous. There is no clarity. There is no clarity, representation, geographical terms, that how many countries should be there from each continent, because the size of the continent also matters. Australia is itself a continent and a country. So there is no consensus, of course. Criteria is not clear, and the terms in which world should be divided is not clear. There are concerns over jurisdiction of the United Nations. At the anniversary of United Nations in 2005, which was held in September, so it was celebrated, and many countries, most of the countries have agreed that there should be some of the measures that should be taken by United Nations to for it to become relevant in the current scenario. So there were some of the points that were listed here, and they are also mentioned in your book, that there should be a peace building commission and all this stuff. But there is also a problem that there is no clarity, and people don't know what should what to be done at that point of time, because there are lots of things that when these things come into place, when these things come into force, most of the people and most of the countries become uncooperative. For example, if an United Nations agency is working in Myanmar, and suddenly Myanmar turn into a dictatorial state. In that scenario, all the investment, all the money that were invested by United Nations in the Myanmar goes into drain. So it is actually a waste of money, because after the military coup, of course, military will not allow United Nations to perform its tasks for working for like and ending hunger, working for ending poverty. So in that scenario, there is sudden change, and in that scenario, all the plans, all the structures, and all the things that were planned by United Nations for a better world goes into drain. So there it is a map of United Nations peacekeeping operation, and India is one of the priority country which send its forces, its personnel to United Nations peacekeeping operation. And recently a woman was awarded who was from India for its actions and for its help in maintaining peace in Africa. You must find about her. So there, it is a brief introduction about World Bank. World Bank is called the sister of International Monetary Fund. It was formed in 1944 at a Bretton Woods conference, and it has 189 members. President is David Malpass, and I think uh, okay, what the work is done by World Bank. It provides loan to middle and low income countries at reasonable interest rate for developmental activities, because it does not provide loan for any sort of random activities. For example, Indian government cannot take loan from World Bank and International Monetary Fund for paying the salaries of its employees, because it's not a developmental task. But it can take loan from World Bank and United International Monetary Fund for developmental activities like building health infrastructure, education, ending poverty, and building any dam project, because it also gives employment to lots of people. So it can take loan for these kind of activities. And there is also criticism, because when you are taking loan from a World Bank, they set certain conditions that need to be fulfilled by a particular country. So they give loan only after you fulfill and you take some actions for the furtherance of some causes. India and its vision for UN. So what are the things that India want about United Nations? So India, first thing is that India want a change in the membership, in the permanent membership UNSC, and India wants a greater role for it in United Nations, because after 1991 there is a huge play and there is a huge role of India and China, other developing countries at international platform. Counter-terrorism, because it has become a hot topic, it has become an elephant in the room nowadays, because there is a huge need of countering terrorism nowadays, and most of the countries are ignoring it, and there are interests of certain countries in it. There should be representation of unrepresented countries. For example, from Africa, there is very less or no representation in United Nations Security Council, and you would say that most of the United Nations agency, they have head from developed countries or from countries which have higher economy. Where there are very less organizations which have their head or their president from Africa. There should be maritime security, because nowadays it has become a hot topic. Sea navigation, and there are lots of piracy at in sea, Indian near Somalia, Horn of Africa, Indian Ocean. There is a huge piracy, and there is a huge racket of piracy, and it has become a very relevant thing in nowadays, that to take some of the actions for maritime security. And India wants some transparency and independence in its structure, because some of the countries like US, China, because of their power of finance, military, space, and bureaucracy, they take and they build some sort of group, and they some sort of dubious things, and they do a back channel diplomacy, that is known as that you are not doing something in front of others, you are actually playing greater role behind the curtains. So it is one of the things that is very relevant in today's world. Hope you get to know about it. So United Nations in a unipolar world, because after 1991 we were living in a unipolar world, but nowadays in 21st century we have seen that world is no longer unipolar. There are lots of countries, especially developing countries, who are playing a huge role at international level. But still, United Nations is still a superpower, as that is superseding all the countries. So there are some of the things that need to be taken into consideration by United Nations and its member for a realization of reforms. So there's a trivia about Amnesty International. It is an organization which works for human rights. It has headquarters in India, in Delhi. So there is an Amnesty International branch. It has a branch which is primarily focusing in India. So it has headquarters in Delhi for India. At a world level, it has headquarters in London. It has founder Peter Benenson, and at present its leader is Agnes Calamard. It was founded in 1961 July. Human rights what? Same. It also worked for human rights protection. It was founded in 1978. It has headquarters in New York. It is also called Helsinki Watch. It has founders. It has 3 founders, and it also works for maintaining human rights and working for human rights and fighting for human rights. So this is all about it. Hope you have a good clarity about United Nations. United Nations is nothing, is a sort of huge thing that might be afraid of. It is just an organization which has its shadow over all the countries, and there are some of the topics that need, there are some of the things, and there are some of the areas that are maintained, and it has rules of United Nations. So United Nations is like a cloud organization. It is a cloud organization, an umbrella organization which has various countries under it, and who are performing under its rules and under its mechanisms. So there are some other things. So if you have any doubt regarding it, and if you have any question regarding United Nations, you can put it in the comment section, and I will be very happy to read about it, and I will be very happy to answer you regarding it. So thank you so much about it. And if you want the PDF of this section, this United Nations, I will provide you it in the description box, or you could get at my blog also. And I will brief you about it as soon as possible. So thank you everybody for this. Have a